The date is October 24th in the year 2023. My name is Anita Hecht, and I have the great pleasure and honor of interviewing Mary Baldwin on behalf of the Finnep Foundation and the Garden City Oral History Project. Welcome to this interview, Mary. We're here to capture your recollections of Garden City, its history, its people, you, as well as the changes it's gone through and what you think of them. So we're conducting this interview in the Community Congregational Church in Garden City, Kansas. So I want to just first thank you for agreeing to participate in this first-person archive of stories. Let's begin with a little bit about you and your background. When and where were you born?
Well, I was born right here in St. Catherine's Hospital, that is just 2 or 3 blocks from where we are now. And in fact, my younger brother and I were both born here. Mm-hmm. And then I also lived and grew up on Gillespie Street, that is just 3 or 4 blocks from the community church. So this church is kind of the center and the zone of where I grew up.
Where your life began.
Where my life began.
And when did it begin?
It began on a hot July day, July 5th, 1949.
Okay. Do you know what the population was of Garden City approximately when you were born?
Oh, it was 6,000 or 7,000. It wasn't 10,000. It was small. Mm-hmm. It was a small community. Yes, it has changed, grown. It's the progression, and it's interesting because I haven't been back to Garden City for a while, so I have driven around here in this immediate area, and of course things have changed. But I just have such a warm, I just consider myself so fortunate that I grew up in Garden City, Kansas, and in this neighborhood.
Mm-hmm. Tell me who was in your family.
Well, okay. My father, he was born in 1909, and then my mother in 1913, and they lived in Scott County, that's about 35 miles north of Garden City. And so then I have 2 older sisters, Sandra, and she was 11 years older than I was. Then came Jane, 6 years later. Then I came along 6 years later, and then my younger brother, and we call him by his initials, EC, he was 2 years younger than I was. So it is like they had 2 separate families. Mm-hmm. And I don't really know why, but really it was my brother and I that we grew up together.
I see. Yeah. So tell me your full name at birth.
Mary Louise Brookover, now Baldwin.
And do you know anything about the history of the name Brookover?
I do know, I should know more, but I don't. But I know that, it was German.
Okay.
And so I don't know.
Well, you do know a little bit about your ancestry. Tell me, where did the Brookovers, and your mother's maiden name was?
Schaefer.
Schaefer.
Yes.
Do you know
my mother was born and raised in Manhattan, Kansas. Grew up there and went to Kansas State University. And then my dad grew up in Scott County on a farm north of Scott City. And he grew up with 2 other brothers. And his mother died early on. So I think it was kind of a rough time for them in the early 1900s. And so their mother had died, and so here was their dad with 3 sons, but then he ended up remarrying, but I think it was a tough time for those three boys. But they've been good friends for all through their lifetimes.
Do you know anything about the immigration story on either side of your family? You said German names. Did they both come from Germany?
But I don't,
Okay.
Anita. I can't really answer to that. I can only go back to Scott County and
Okay.
yeah.
How did your parents meet?
Oh, that's a pretty cute story. So they were both at Kansas State University, and so they were at a fraternity party. And my mother was sitting next to my dad, and for some reason she fell asleep on his shoulder.
Oh.
And that's how they met. And so here she was, born and raised in Manhattan in a university town. And then they married, and she ended up in this small little rural community in western Kansas. And so...
Was it unusual for women in her day to go to college?
It was. And she was a journalism major. And and she didn't get to finish that degree because they did move to Scott County, but it was rare. That's a good question, but it was. So
I'm curious about your dad's trajectory. She studied journalism. What was he studying, and how did his youth develop and his interests?
Well, he growing up on a dryland farm in Scott County, he worked during high school for a insurance company, and that is when and it was all dryland farming.
Tell me just the definition of dryland farming for the future generations.
Absolutely no irrigation at all. And so they had to depend on rainfall. And so anyhow, he spent his high school years experimenting with water and irrigation, working for an insurance company. And so that was the beginning, because he was very curious, and he knew that the grains and the crops would come if they could get water, to them. But he then went to Kansas State, and it was a civil engineering degree. But then he went, I've got to go find out more. And so that is where he went out to California and worked for 2 or 3 years for a company that was irrigating. And then he went down to South America and spent time down there, and they taught him about irrigating, and he was working with sugarcane. And so you can see what his path was and his curiosity of how do we get water. So he went back to Kansas State and finished his degree in civil engineering. And so that brings us back to when my mother and father met at the fraternity party and came out to Scott County.
Okay.
And so that's when he started his whole career of how do we irrigate and how do we get water on this ground, and he did it. And so now here we are with pivot irrigation and massive farming in western Kansas.
At what point did they come to Garden City?
They came to Garden City. They were in Scott City for 3 years, and they had my 2 older sisters in Scott City. So it was 1947 when they came to Garden City. And
And what brought them here? Do you know why they moved here?
I just think because it was a larger community, and my mother has been raised in Manhattan. I think it was just a better fit for them, and it wasn't very far away. It was just 35 miles north of where they were in Scott City.
Okay.
And so moved to Garden City, and they purchased the house that we all grew up in, and I'll just refer to it as the Gillespie Street house, and it was a wonderful big 2-story house. And but during that time, he was building the North Feed Yard from 1947, and then he opened that feed yard in 1951.
So tell me a little bit about his vision. He had the idea to create a feed yard.
He just knew that there absolutely had to be a way to feed cattle and grow the grain to feed the cattle. And instead of cattle coming in and being transported by train, why couldn't we grow them here in the western part of the state? And so he had all of that, going. I mean, here he was, a college boy, but I know he was formulating all of that in his early years, and because of his experience, he goes, no, we should be able to irrigate, we should be able to grow the corn, the wheat, we should be able to feed them here. And then, I mean, he knew that eventually that the meat packing plants would come in, and he was an extraordinary visionary man.
Tell me a little bit more about him. So I don't even think we got his full name recorded yet.
Okay. So his full name was Earl Copeland Brookover.
Okay.
And so he was a big man. And not so tall, but I mean, he was big. I mean, he just had stature. And he always wore a silver, what we call the silver belly Stetson hat, which is a silver Stetson hat, and a white shirt, khaki pants, and a belt, and boots. So when you saw Earl Brookover, that was what you saw: the hat, the shirt, the boots. And but he was an intimidating man, and or he was as a little person. Of course, I'm looking at this huge man, but he was a good man, but he was planning, and my childhood, and I don't mean this in a derogatory sense, but he was very busy. From when I was born in 1949, my brother was born in 1951, and that's when he opened the North Feed Yard. Well, I mean, he was a busy man. And then on through my childhood, and it's just the way it was. I don't mean that in a derogatory sense. He was building. My mother was holding down the household and helping us as little ones. But he just wasn't he really enjoyed us when we were older. Because I remember at 18, that's when I went, oh, we are really nice friends. Because we would exchange ideas, or he was an avid reader, and we'd exchange books, and yeah, and so, I mean, we really, really had a good time. But, I mean,
But he wasn't a kid person.
he wasn't
per
a
se.
kid person. I kind of had to be an older adult.
Did you know much about how he got started in terms of financing? I mean, if he grew up on a dryland farm during the Depression, I don't imagine he started with a lot of means.
No.
And so how did he get the land and the...
He had to borrow, you know, all of that money. And I don't know this for sure, but I think it was from the Garden National Bank, and probably good reason for them to move to Garden City when they did. And so he took a chance, and he had to borrow all that money to build that feed yard. And so
But he made a success out of it. Can you tell me?
very much so, and he was such a risk taker. And so that was his first.
How many cattle did he start out with? How many heads? And do you know what it grew to?
Oh, I wish I had my notes. It was just.
I think you had said that the original one had about 40,000.
No, that was after it had grown,
Already
into 40,000. So I mean, he started with 10,000 head in the North Feed Yard, and then it just grew, and then they added pens, and the whole facility grew, and it was 40,000 head for that facility.
And then there were more feed yards after that first one.
And then we had the feed yard south of Garden City, and he had purchased the Hicks Ranch, and we built that. I say he built that yard. And then just recently, we acquired all the Brookover property in Scott County, and that's the third feed yard. So presently, we can feed 200,000 head of cattle.
Wow.
Isn't that remarkable?
That's remarkable.
Yes.
And grow the grains for them as well?
Yes. But also have to buy a lot of grains too, in addition to that. But we do grow massive amounts of grain.
So he was running a huge operation.
Huge
Was there
operation.
anything like that?
There was nothing like that in western Kansas, and not very many in the Midwest. But yes, there were operations like that. But he could see that here in western Kansas we had the perfect climate to do all of those things, and he was.
So what was his day-to-day like? I don't imagine he got out and fed the cattle himself.
No, he didn't.
Or run a combine. What did he do day-to-day?
He always rose, and he was up early and left the house at 5 or 6 in the morning, and he'd get in his big 4-door Ford sedan, and he would go out to the feed yard and ride up and down the pens looking at cattle before he went to the office at 9. So then he took off for lunch, and he had a lengthy lunch. But he would always come home for lunch, and that was his reading time. So he'd have lunch, and then he would sit and read. He was a book reader, newspaper reader, magazine reader, and he read everything from educational, industry. I read just like him. But he absolutely loved. So he took 2.5 hours.
Wow.
And then he would go, back to the office, but spent a lot of time at the yard just observing, driving up and down and observing all of the pens. But one thing he did really well, everybody that worked for him and with him, he let them do their job. And he had wonderful foremans and managers through the years. And we, as the children, knew all of them very well. And so he just...
He was a good businessman and a good people person, it sounds like, and a good
He was
manager.
a good businessman, people person. He was quiet and introspective. And so introverted would not be the correct word for him. But he was a good businessman. And he was known for this. He really said very little when he was in a group of people because he was observant. But when he did speak, everybody would sit up and go and listen to what he had to say. And so it was kind of like the E.F. Hutton commercial of years ago. But that was Earl Brookover. And so he observed people and their behavior and listened to them. So,
can you talk a little bit about, and we will get to your life, but I'm still curious a little bit about the operations and the employees. So sort of how the feed industry worked and then who worked it.
Okay, the feed yard itself. Okay.
He would buy calves or raise.
Okay. Yes. So the process would be the cattle would come off of pasture and they would come into the feed yard and they would be there for a couple of months. But the feed yard, and this is simplifying it truly is simplifying it, it was so spatialized that they would come in off of a truck and let's say 50 head of cattle. So they would come in and unload them into a spatial pen. They'd weigh them. They would put them on a spatial grain diet and keep them there for a period of time before they would move them to their permanent pen. So, and I truly don't mean to simplify it, but it is like they came into a spa or a hotel because, I mean, they took very, very good care of them. And so
then they stayed there for several months?
Yes, they did. And they were there to gain weight, stay very healthy. And they still do this today. We still have men on horseback. We refer to them as our cowboys. And they ride those pens every day, up and down the lanes. And they have a fine ear for respiratory, anything that's going on with those cattle. And which is rare, but if they do, then they trailer them to the hospital, take care of them until they go, back. And it's such a high-tech, the technology behind this business, and I truly am simplifying it. And but our employees through the years, there was a manager, assistant manager for each yard, all of our cowboys. We couldn't have done it. Those operations, like anything else, we couldn't have done it without them. And So,
Now, Garden City is known today for having a lot of immigrants from other countries.
yes. Yes.
Did Brookover feed yards also?
Oh, we did. We had we had wonderful Hispanic employees for long time employees for they had wonderful families and we did. We had a lot of we did had a lot of Hispanics through the years, and
were they already here, or did
some were already here.
your dad have to
and
recruit?
then some were new.
Okay.
And then and we had to make sure they were documented.
Okay.
But it took a lot of people to run those feed yard and to keep them clean, keep the bunks cleaned out, drive the feed trucks. They work in the mills. So yes, we did, and we really just appreciated them, and those families are still, they're generations old, and those
We're still here.
Hispanics that worked for us when I was growing up, their families are still here. And so fortunate.
Did your dad speak any Spanish?
No, he
No.
didn't. He didn't.
That they communicated.
Yeah.
You started talking about water, and dryland farming, and that's a huge technology that changed. So, do you remember, any discussions with your dad about water? Were there wells everywhere? How did you?
Well, the one thing I remember, one Christmas, when we all opened books from him. All four of us got these books, and it was on water. Now here we are, teenagers, looking at these books going, okay, why, what? But that was such a concern of his all those years ago. And that was in the 60s. And so, he was thinking about water, and he was concerned about water at that point in time. And then, as far as water wells, is that what you're asking me? I just wasn't an active part of that.
Do you remember other things like him watching the markets or what happened during downturns?
Oh, yes. We learned to walk very lightly when the markets were down. And to describe him, he would sit over in the living room in his big green chair, and with his books stacked here, magazines here, newspapers stacked, candy dish. And so you would have to walk across that room to get to the kitchen. But, you'd be very careful because he was cranky when the markets were down. And so, never mean, but he just was, we knew when the markets were down. But as a little kid, that's the only reason why we knew, till we were in high school. We also, every day at noon, we listened to the market reports on the radio. And so, I will take that back. We did know when the markets were up and when they were down. So it was very much a part of our everyday, the markets, everyday life.
Were there any serious downturns you remember in the family in terms of the business life impacting your life at home? Any big, or was it a pretty steady, successful business that just kept growing over the years?
Yes.
Okay.
It did. It just steadily grew. as he acquired property. And I remember back in, I was graduating from high school, and he was acquiring the property south of Garden City that's now the ranch feed yard. And I mean, that was a huge acquisition. And I just remember him being very tense about all of that, trying to make the decision whether he should acquire that land. And once again, I mean, he was a risk taker. And so he did, and he also acquired the Burnside property. So the Hicks property, the Burnside property, which is now Brookover Ranch Feed Yard, and is also Southwind Country Club and Development. What if he wouldn't have taken that risk? But I did get to witness, and I was there when all of that was.
So he really
going
diversified. He went into real estate. He developed a country club, oil and gas as well.
Yeah, yes, but I don't think I know one of his specialties was, and something he loved. He just went. I mean, he was a land use man, and so how can that land? I mean, he knew that there was a reason. So he looked at the sand hills out south, and he knew that it could be developed into a golf course, or what could be growing out there, potatoes in the sand. And so that was just remarkable. But land usage was one of his specialties. Yes.
Well, you weren't on the front lines of the business, but I do want to talk to you now a little bit about what it meant to be part of the Brookover family and grow up here in Garden City. So, but first I'm curious, were there any expectations of you, your sisters, or your brother to go into the family business?
Yes. I would say that was very evident because we have Sister Sandra that was so much older than my brother and I. In fact, she was 13 years older. And then we have next sister, and she was 5 years later. And then a long span, and I came along 6 years later. And then brother EC 2 years later. So to me, it was always evident that yes, the son was expected to take over the business.
Okay.
And so I think that's what, and remembering they were very busy through all this time, but I think that's what the long segments of time were between. And then I came along and, okay, let's try for a son. And they did. And yes, and so I could see where my brother was groomed to run the business.
And he did for a while.
And he did.
And now it's to his kids' generation.
Yes.
So this has remained in the family.
So his son Ty and his daughter Amanda that live here in Garden City. And he does have a third daughter, Emily. And Emily is an artist, and she lives in New Jersey now. But for two of his children that are running this immense business, I'm just really proud of them. So that's third generation, and I think we're going to make it. I think third generations aren't supposed to. I mean, that
Right.
And here we go.
Wow.
It's exciting, and
Let's
go ahead.
spend a little time talking to them also about your experience of growing up in the 50s, because I imagine it was quite different than theirs. Talk to me about Garden City and your environment during the youth years.
Well, I think probably if you spoke to anybody that was born and raised in the 50s, they'd probably say the same thing. But Garden City was just such a pretty little town and so manageable and simple. And I mean, the street that we grew up on in Gillespie, all the neighbors, we knew each other, and everybody lived on their front porches. And it was just a friendly community. And we could ride our bicycles up to the grocery store. We could ride our bicycles anywhere in town because it was so small. So it was really a very happy, warm time for
And
me.
safe, it sounds
and
like.
safe. Mm-hmm. Very safe.
And your
growing up.
family was fairly affluent from the businesses. Was it fairly middle class everywhere? Did you
Yes.
see poverty here or anything?
Of course, yes.
Like
we
that.
did have poverty. But, I was very fortunate, and I did grow up on with wonderful, well-educated business people around me. Not only up and down the street, but my parents' friends.
Yeah.
And so...
You told me a funny story about the family across the street, the president of the National Bank and his wife without children. Tell me that.
Well,
It's a small town.
It's
tale.
small. It's a great small town tale, and their names were Leigh and Lucille Perry, and Leigh was president of the Garden National Bank, which I think that's where all of the. I think that's where Earl financed Figuard, but. So we had a great big front porch, and the Perrys lived right next door to us, and they had no children. But they were just the dearest couple, and he'd come home at 5 o'clock every day up the driveway, and before he'd put his car in the garage, he'd get his rag out and dust it off, and then she was Mrs. Perry, she was just very proper and dressed all the time. And but I think with the 4 Brookover kids next door, it was quite entertaining for them. And so I remember when we'd come home from dates and we would look up and there's Mrs. Perry up in the second story of their house, peeking through the blinds to see if anybody was going to get kissed. And we just waved to her, and that'd be the end of that. But I just had wonderful neighbors and wonderful friends around me. So I had a very happy childhood, and I think my brother E.C. did too. And but at the time, my older sisters were teenagers when I was a little kid, and they were gone when we were in high school.
You went to public schools here?
Yes.
Any stories about your life in school? I know you had said you had one little rebellion
Oh,
during
yes.
your teenage
yes.
years, which I thought...
But my grade school years, once again, we walked to school and...
Came home for lunch.
We came home for lunch. It was just easy. And then high school, I had 5 wonderful friends. And I have to say, we were very good all through high school. Everybody was cheerleaders and homecoming queens. But there was a time when we decided that we were going to sneak in the zoo, and we were going to paint the white polar bears. There were 2 of them, and we did. And We were very, very lucky that we didn't get caught. And we took vegetable dye and mixed it with water and sprayed the bears. And oh my, we really thought we were something. And, but I mean, we were really fortunate we didn't get caught.
What did you? So you were close enough to polar bears to spray them with?
Yeah, it was in a water tank with vegetable dye.
Like what color?
Where they wouldn't get hurt.
Okay.
And so it came out pink. And so here are these two poor polar bears, you know, and we sprayed them pink. And then we did see lights coming in the park, and we just went, oh my, there's the police. And we really thought that we were caught. But we were fortunate, we didn't get caught. But the thing is, if we would have, I mean, my Brookover name and the other little high school girls, I mean, we would have been in so much trouble. But anyhow, that was just the raciest thing that we did in high school. So,
you said your mom noticed the pink polar bears, but didn't say.
Yeah, I think she knew all along. She knew all along, but didn't say anything.
Well, you also grew up in an interesting time. I mean, the 60s, there was a lot going on in the country. Did that come to Garden City at all? Those, you know, JFK's assassination, civil rights, lots of protest against the Vietnam War. Did that enter your world here at all, or was it pretty removed?
It did, but it was pretty removed. And I remember I was in middle school when they announced that JFK had been shot. And so, and they let all the schools out. And I remember that was just so heartbreaking for all the American people. And here in Garden City, Kansas. I mean, that was a very sad time. And so then, in the early 1970s, I mean, the Vietnam War, yes, it did affect Garden City because we had a lot of, you know, people going into the service, and we lost people in the Vietnam War. So there was a lot of turmoil during those years. And but you know, too, in the late 60s, my parents were so busy at that time. I graduated from high school in 1967. And, but at the time, my dad was president of the Kansas Livestock Association. My mother was president of the state, they called them the Cowbells, but it was the women's auxiliary of the Livestock Association. And I mean, they were really busy. And during those late 60s and early 70s. And so there was a lot going on in the United States. There was a lot going on in the state of Kansas and in our household. And so I
got lost in the mix probably a little bit.
Okay, I did.
Yeah.
I did.
Do you remember your parents having political views that were strong, either about national or local politics? Did they get involved? And I also think it's so different than today is.
Yes. They were very definite Republicans. But they didn't have time for, you know, involvement. But I also did know, of course, who they were voting for, because I mean, during the campaigns, we knew, you know, that they were voting for Ike. What was the saying? I like Ike buttons. And so, through my childhood, we knew exactly where they were, in regard to who they were going to vote for, but no, they weren't strongly
Right,
involved.
okay.
No.
How else did the business come and impact your home life? Come into the house. I remember you had told me your dad loved to make steaks. There was
Yes.
also some late night phone calls. Tell me a little bit.
He did. And so this is just from the personal and the family aspect of us growing up while he was out building his
Empire.
egg empire. But it was just funny things. I mean, I remember him always coming in the back door, and we had 2 or 3 boot jacks by the back door. And so he'd always be pulling his boots off. And so that was the norm for inside of our back door to see 2 or 3 pair of boots. And then I would spend time. I remember my bedroom upstairs, it had the wall telephone just outside the door with the big long cord. So as a junior high and high school person, the phone would ring in the middle of the night. And I would have to get up in the middle of the night to answer the phone. And because no one else was going to. And it was always a driver that had been driving all night long that was bringing in a truckload of cattle. And he was up at the feed yard and ready to unload them. And I said, well, I'll just have to give you the number of our manager because, he didn't know. So he was calling Earl Brookover's house to see about unloading cattle. But that happened many times. There were nights where I would get up 2 or 3 times to, get the cattle where they were supposed to go. But that's just a fun childhood memory. And so...
Anything else about your childhood or growing up in the family that you want to document here? Changes that you saw already then happening in Garden City?
Yes. I was married in 1971 in Garden City. And as I said before, there was so much change going on in the early 70s. So, also, we went through those years and where Iowa beef packers came in 1979 and 1980, which was, one of my father's visions, that the meat packing plants would come here because we had all the cattle.
Mm-hmm. And previously you were sending them by rail to Chicago.
And truck and Kansas City.
Okay.
When Iowa beef packers came in 1980, that was a major change in Garden City because it took many people to come in to operate that plant. So we had so many Vietnamese people, Laotians. There were 5 or 6, but mostly at the time it was Vietnamese, and so we had many Vietnamese families come in, and this was after the Vietnam War, and so many, were here, and so Garden City had to move very quickly and get their infrastructure adjusted, the school system, and then we did see it was difficult for the older Garden Cityans because here was our pretty little town, and then all of a sudden we have an influx of not just Vietnamese, but just a mix. And so we had to learn how to adjust to all of that, and we did. I'm going to give Garden City and Finney County fair credit. We did a great job of that. And it's been a benefit to all of us through the years, because a lot of those families worked, earned money, and then went on. But a lot of the Vietnamese families stayed, and their children went into the school system, and they wanted to speak English well. They wanted to be Americans. Mm-hmm. So you saw them strive to do all that. So we had outstanding students, and their parents had wonderful businesses. So now, present day, we benefit from their restaurants, their professional businesses. So it was all good. But I was there in the 70s while we went through that pretty tough transition time.
Do you have any specific stories about meeting anyone that was that different than you, or seeing tensions that happened among people?
No, early on in growing up, because of our generational Hispanic families that had been here for a long time, we just didn't have any of that in our school systems. And I have to tell this one story, because this was Garden City when I was in high school. African Americans, when I was in high school, we didn't know about that here. We didn't have any, except one, and her name was Hazel. And Hazel Tobert, she was just one of my fun best friends in Garden City. But isn't it interesting, with all of our immigration and all of our Hispanic, Mexican Americans, we had no African Americans in Garden City, Kansas. And so it's just interesting that Hazel and her family, they did well here. Mm-hmm. So So that was very, very interesting. And we still don't. But,
So, any changes to neighborhoods, housing, things that you witnessed changing with this big
influx? During that
influx?
time, yes, because we didn't have housing. Mm-hmm. And here we had this influx of people, and so they had to build houses very quickly, and infrastructure and streets. So Garden City grew very quickly, and some of that was good, and some of it, wasn't so good. But we had many massive trailer parks for temporary housings during that time. So that's the change that.
The other thing I failed to ask you was, do you remember any of desegregation happening? I mean, in the 50s we still had segregation, and the 60s come and the Civil Rights Act gets passed. I know you had said that you worked at the municipal pool as a lifeguard. Mm-hmm. Was that all integrated by then?
Mm-hmm, it was. That's right. Thank you for reminding me that I did work at the world's largest free municipal concrete swimming pool. Now, I think presently it's not free anymore, but the rest, and they put a water park in. But no, Anita, there just really wasn't ever, it was all integrated, mm-hmm. and we just didn't have it. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't remember there being a problem with all of that, so we were very fortunate.
For the most part, would you see that the changes you've seen have been positive?
Yes. And it's interesting for me to come back to Garden City because I haven't lived in Garden City for 17 years. But I've, of course, come to visit because Garden City is just a part of me, and I do come back and visit, so I have watched the changes. But the positive, wonderful part of Garden City is I've seen so many of our children and the ones that I've watched grow up here now as adults. I mean, here they are starting businesses and are very much a part of the community. And so the generations, they're coming back to Garden City instead of exiting. And so I just see that as wonderful growth. And driving downtown in downtown Garden City yesterday, it just is vital and it looks good. I mean, I'm excited about Garden City.
Do you think the Garden City you raised 2 children here, was it very different for them here growing up than it was for you, or was it similarly safe and simple and...
Probably not as safe and simple as it was for me, but you could ask them and they would say yes. That they felt very fortunate, growing up here, but they also had, and I think it was to all of our benefits that they grew up with the Mexican Americans, and my kids, they grew up with a lot of Vietnamese friends, and they also saw them as valedictorian of their classes, and I mean, they were just vital. So my kids were good. They were good, really, really good growing up here. And so...
We can do a whole other oral history, I'm sure, about your involvement with Brookover Enterprises, because you worked there for 35 years.
Yes.
Do you want to say anything about what you learned from your dad about running a company, or what you hope its legacy is?
Well, I think truly one of the wisest things that he taught all 4 of his children, and I'm glad that, because he said, 2 things. Always keep very smart people all around you, smarter than you are. And that's how he built his company. He did. He had specialized people that specialized in their area, and he considered them much smarter in their area than he was. And then the second thing was always keep young people around you. And he was so right on about both of those aspects. And so I tried to do that.
Would you like to say anything about the pitfalls of family businesses? Because they carry their own challenges, I'm sure.
Yes, there is, and because there was such an age difference between the 4 of
Siblings.
us, and just locale or logistic-wise, because Jane and Sandra lived in California and Arizona, just the communication was difficult. But, overall, the Brookover children, which we are now all grandparents, but, we did well, and we have such a wonderful legacy that Earl Brookover and our mother, Ethel Denelda Shaver Brookover,
Otherwise known
as Sally. Yes, I think that was a college name. But that they left us a wonderful legacy. And I think we've taken good care of it, and I think our third generation is taking fine care of it.
Do you have any concerns about the future in terms of big agribusiness or water use, or, I mean, there's lots of directions that question can go, but things that worry you?
Well, I think the one that really, I mean, water is an issue. And I did visit with Ty Brookover and Amanda about this last week, and they just said absolutely yes, it's still an issue and it's front and center, and so they're always going to be studying that and looking at that. And as we did when we were there, and then it goes clear back to us, receiving books on water from years and years ago. So that's ongoing.
Mm-hmm. I guess it's not inexhaustible, the aquifer, I guess.
We hope not.
Yeah.
We hope not. Mm-hmm.
Anything else that you'd like your kids, grandkids, the next generations to know that I haven't asked you? I mean, there's many things, I'm sure.
Oh, there's so many things, but I just hope they'll at some point take the time to learn about their legacy and about their grandparents and the cattle business and western Kansas, because I feel that it's just a very important part of them and their makeup, and appreciate how fortunate we all are. So, yeah.
Do you eat a lot of steak?
You'd asked me that before, and I said not so much anymore, and I regretted saying that because it is not true. we do eat steak, and my husband and I probably once a week. And hamburger, ground beef, yes. Now, when I lived here and I was around it all the time, I mean, I grew up with a freezer full of beef and took that for granted. But yes, we do. We do, absolutely, eat beef. And I just get so hungry for a great steak. And yeah.
I had one last night here.
Good. That's great.
Is there anything I haven't asked you that you want to close with?
No, I don't. I just hold Garden City and Finney County and all of the people that I've grown up with, and I just hold them all dear to my heart and feel so fortunate. So
thank you for sharing a little bit of your history here.
Okay, thank you. I've enjoyed it.